All right, for people joining this live stream, we are talking about historical geographic functionality in Wolfram language. This is a long-awaited, as far as I'm concerned, at least, design review of this functionality about things that are from often the distant past. All right, so let's get started here. So first, is this new, this dated construct here?
No. I am only putting it as an example of how the polygons in historical country already work.
Okay.
The issue I was trying to signal with including historical countries in the geofunctions is that the geofunctions work by allowing the user to make use of the geographic shapes assigned to different entities. But the issue with
we've already got a problem here. Why didn't that work?
Well, first of all, I think you need to put a list around 261.
But missing not applicable is unconvincing. I mean, that is correct. That's granularity of a year. Well, let's do granularity of a year. So that worked, but the century did not. What should it do? Missing not applicable is not a very good answer there.
I mean, what is it if it's not applicable?
Well, go ahead.
I think with the geo functions, what we try to do with lower granularity data objects is to, in this case, return a time series of the polygons during these long time periods.
That would be wonderful.
Well, but that seems like it could lead to issues though, because, well, for example, if we had, if we had more granular data at some point, right now everything is at a year, but suppose, during World War II or something, we have data that's, at the month level or something. Then if you gave it a year granularity thing, it would then suddenly start giving a time series. I feel like it's very unpredictable. It's better if it sort of like returns the head you expect.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the right thing to do here is if you feed a date object, it should return a single thing. If you feed a date interval, then you are asking explicitly for a range.
Fair point. Okay, but we need to decide what to do. I mean, maybe it just returns in the center of the century, or I don't know what. Anyway, we'll pin that in.
The standard thing is usually the beginning. We have a tendency to select the beginning of a date object when we can only handle an instant.
Okay. But Cesar was starting off describing something, and I kind of cut him off. Sorry. So please continue.
Okay. The issue with the historical polygons is that they have with historical countries, I'm sorry, is that unlike geographical entities that have only a single shape assigned to them, they have many shapes that change over time.
Indeed.
And then we then have to condense that data in order to make calculations. That's how.
But I understand. But so
yes.
Let's be specific here. I mean, okay, you're going to show stuff about geovariance or what?
Yes. There we defined 3 possible geovariants. One that is a time series of polygons.
Mm-hmm.
Another that is the group, a geo group of all the polygons assigned to an entity, as you can see in that example.
Okay. Although that doesn't record when.
No.
That just records what.
Exactly.
Okay.
And if you look below,
mm-hmm.
the maximum expansion geovariant is the largest geographic shape or polygon assigned to the entity. Also does not record the date.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, and part of the discussion now will be what will be the best name for these geovariants.
And I don't think those are convincing. But yeah, okay. But let's
Sure,
keep
sure.
going.
And what would be the default also?
Mhm.
Yes.
Right.
I put there an example because when we are talking about, for instance, the first geofunction that we are considering, geo within Q.
Yep.
That function is pretty straightforward with geographical entities, but it could be.
Yeah, let me just get an understanding. Okay, so I understand the first point is there are three different possible things. There's actually four things, right? Because there's this specific, there's the form of the Gallic Empire on a specific date. There's the time series, but for the Gallic Empire as a whole, throughout its history, there is the time series, there's the collection of polygons that we happen to have in our database, and there's the maximum extension, which might not have been contemporary. In other words, they might have extended to the south and then lost the southern territory and extended to the north. But maximum expansion, presumably, is essentially the convex hull of where that empire reached. Is that correct?
Wait, no. That's just the point at which it had the greatest area. You don't want to show a polygon that never existed.
That would be the union of this geogroup.
Right. It's much more useful to do the maximal bi of geogroup comma geo area than it is to do some union.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Like if you do unions, you'll find things that are like totally unrecognizable because you'd be like, oh, I didn't know that, for 10 minutes, Rome controlled whatever, and it'll be some weird looking map.
Okay, fair enough.
Yes, exactly. And as Francisco told, geogroup works as a kind of union when talking about the geofunctions. As it is a collection of all the polygons, if we say, for instance, that a point belongs to the geogroup, is the same to saying that it belongs to the union.
Except that it's just a list. I mean, how would I take that list and actually make the region union of it? Can I do that? Do you understand what I'm asking?
You can really do it right
Yes.
now. You'd have to boundary discretize graphics each of the polygons. Or actually, sorry, you have to geogrid position each of the polygons, boundary discretize graphics, region union, and then getting it back into, you do some mesh primitives thing.
So it's a big mess, basically.
There isn't a super clean way to do it right now.
Okay. There's no geo-region union type thing.
No.
No.
The other, sorry, go ahead.
No. I would just say no.
Okay. I was going to ask what the relationship, is it intentional that this is using the same name as geogroup? Because geogroup is a symbol that we have.
Yes. If you wrap geogroup around this, then geographics will treat this as a unity.
Right. But it just seems like if
doesn't
you
seem
ask
like
for
the
a
right
geogroup, you sort of maybe would expect something.
I don't think it's the right name. I don't think it's the right name.
Yeah, I agree with that. It was just this idea of treating it together.
Okay, but so if I say geographics here, then I will get the union.
Right, and you wouldn't need the geogroup in order for the geographics to work, of course.
Okay.
Although actually you can see it didn't, of course it didn't actually compute the union, which you can see because the opacities.
Right. So one polygon seems to be like twice there.
So one quick question is, why are these, what's the argument for using these as geovariants as opposed to having them as, at least some of them, as alternative properties? Like, for example, maximum extent and the dates and stuff like that seems to make sense with like qualifiers. So it makes sense as sort of like geovariant or something like that, which I think usually align with qualifiers. But something like geogroup seems like it could maybe even be its own property.
I agree. Let's just look down further here and then let's loop back to this. Okay, I just want to get a sense of what the whole story is. Okay, so geo within Q.
Yes. With a geographic entity is pretty straightforward. In the case of in the case of a polygon and a point, or an entity that represents a point, it returns if the point is inside the
Yeah, I understand.
polygon.
So the
and
question you want to ask is, was this
is-
point ever in the Gallic Empire? A single
Yes.
point, was it ever there? And
Yes.
that's one question. And then, I mean, and then
Why-
was it there on such
why-
a date?
There
No,
are
I think it's messier than that, because it's stuff like, okay, was the modern state of Italy ever within Rome? Well, it's like, well, they were never contemporaneous. But if I pick my default polygons for them, which is probably the maximum extent, then the answer is yes. But so maybe we're just comparing them at their maximal extents. But then if I say, was the Gallic Empire ever in Rome? Well, these were contemporaneous things, and so it's sort of this becomes more complicated, I think.
Well, so the question is geo within Q, if we think about it in space-time, is it, these empires have an extent in space-time, which, is something we've discussed in the past, actually representing, the space-time history of one of these things. And then geo within Q, we have to define what on earth is it? Is it, projecting in time, projecting in space? What the heck is it? Because we got this blob in space-time, right? What does geo within Q represent with respect to space-time? Does that make sense, that question?
Yep. So
Well, I think the idea here. Go ahead.
Sorry.
So let me say just one thing. So the idea here was that we have several possibilities. So we name them by geovariants, and then we let the various functions do whatever they want to do with the various geovariants. And at the very end, there is the question of which one is the one that we are going to use by default.
I'm not convinced. I think we're being a little bit too naive here.
So I mean, I think there is a space-time interpretation of all these behaviors here, right? So for example, if the maximum expansion is just a single slice, the geo group is, well, actually, maybe it's just a slice that's sort of extended maximally. You take a single slice and then you sort of project it out through all time. And the same with geo group. And then, the dated polygon is instead some weird blobby thing that, doesn't extend infinitely in time and so on.
Exactly.
Right. And that's why we wanted them as geovariants somehow, because we wanted to be able to reference them in these functions and not simply properties. So I think they are useful as properties maybe too, but as geovariants were needed because we wanted to reference them. And this is one of the possible designs, right? Because another way would be to have a different set of functions that will take into account the dated component.
Right.
Of the
Let's just see down to the end here. Okay, so you're asking, so this is so this is defining essentially a space-time object.
Yes.
And this is now asking, but you see, because here's a question, right? How about, is D-Day within, what does that mean? Because is geo within Q asking a time question as well as asking a space question or not? You see what I'm saying? Because it could be the case. We could be asking, is D-Day within the geographic region of the Roman Empire? Clearly,
I think.
Go ahead.
I think that's what the geovariants and maybe this data here are supposed to do, right? I mean, if you say dated polygon, then it is asking the time question as well. If you say, I think any of the others, it's not asking the time question.
All right. Okay. So basically, what we're saying is, if we summarize this, well, I need to save this. Sorry, I'm just trying to save this.
And I'm guessing, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm guessing that the dated is also not asking the time question. It's effectively computing the union of all the polygons between 100 and 200.
By the way, I assume somebody has looked at the previous notes that we had on this topic. You have, haven't you? Have you looked at the previous notes that we have on this topic?
Yes.
2018 and 2019. Which is an awfully long time ago. Disappointed that it's such an unbelievably long time. Okay. Have we not had meetings about this since then?
I don't think so.
I think we covered a bit last year. So more than a year has been.
Okay. Okay. All right. So let's come back again. All right, I just want to get a sense of what you're looking at here. Temporal entities.
Yes, these are still in development. What they do is only identify them by time and not geography. In
So
that one,
let me explain. So this is a separate proposal. So in case we just want the geofunctions to just take care of the geographical part, and then we want to treat the time. I mean, this shouldn't be temporal, maybe dated. I don't know. And then the time part of the entities in a separate way, so as not to overcharge the geographical functions. These two last ones were not meant to be included. Sorry.
Okay. So, all right. So let's come back here. Let's zoom out a little bit to the bigger picture here. So, I mean, what do we have? We have, we have space-time geographic entities. Okay. Defined by certain anchor points, so to speak, which are the slices. So just so I understand here, let me pick one of these, just for fun, just so we understand what we got. What's one of these that has a reasonably large number of polygons? Can somebody help me by taking this and I just want to draw the stack of these things.
So something like Roman Republic usually has like hundreds.
Okay. All right. So let's say okay, can somebody help me with the code? I just so we have a concept here. I want to just draw this as a big stack through time. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Do you mean a geo stack or just a stack?
I mean a stack where I've got the positions. I don't care about projections or anything. I just want to draw them in a 3D, a 3D stack here. How would I do that?
Well,
go ahead.
Probably you'd map GeoGrid position over those to project them, which you have to do, and then maybe you have to boundary discretize graphics them. I'm not sure. If you just want like an opacity stack thing, you can just say geographics of them, though.
You have to provide a projection. So it's GeoGrid position of equirectangular in the second.
Okay, let's just do the geographics of them just to get something, even though it's not really what I wanted. But just because what I'm really wanting is to make the point. Okay, so let's just make this. Okay, fine. Not great, but it's something.
You could probably reduce the opacity and make it a little bit better, but yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, each one, actually, what I probably could do is to say a map thread on this of a style. That's what's a good color? Let's say map.
If you're trying to do a color, color over time, they're all going to be on top of each other. It's going to be unreadable.
I know, but I'm going to have opacity. Style.
Style of hash, comma, color data of.
I was thinking of hue of first of hash 2, comma.
First of hash 2
divided by 20 or something, 30, whatever, divided by length of %10, comma, let's see what I want, 1.1 or something. Is that right? Okay, whatever. Not great, but It is what it is.
Well, one thing, of course, is that also because this isn't using the time series stuff, the periods that lasted 100 years are counting the same in this plot as the periods that lasted 2.
Yes, which is right there. Okay, so in these geopositions, even though geopositions can also have times in them, we're not including those here. Is that correct?
Yes,
Yes.
that's correct.
Because we could include them. Could we
You
not?
mean the initial instant, for example?
Perhaps, yes. Perhaps. I mean, in other words, these things, each one of these in space-time defines a certain space-like slice, right? And then they're stacked in time. And we are implicitly making certain sort of stepping assumptions, or not, about what happens in between the space-like surfaces that we've defined. Right?
Right, yes. It's implicitly an interpolation of order 0.
Yes. Well, I don't even know what order 0 means. That is, I don't know whether it steps up or what it does with respect to when the step happens. Do you see what I'm saying? Does it
Yes.
assume, it assumes that it is a hold until the next one comes in, basically. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
It holds the position until the next one. Okay. So what we're asking then, see, I have this feeling that we should be keeping the time information here. Because without that, and that geo within Q, for example, should even be asking, I mean, should be capable, or perhaps it's a variant of geo within Q, should be capable of asking, how do these overlap in space-time? As well as just how do these overlap in space? Because both are valid questions. Am I making sense? You're never going to get around the fact that there are two different questions.
Right, but I think, at least in this proposal, there is some stuff about exactly that.
Okay. Well, okay. Overlap in space, overlap in space-time, overlap in time. Those are all different questions, right? I don't know whether there are any other. Okay, and that's geo within Q. But now, what are the other kinds of functions that we have here? What's geo-identify? Geo-identify is asking, I see, what country? Okay, but now if I say, hold on, if I say geo-identify Eiffel Tower, why does it need to say entity historical country? It doesn't need the word entity there, right?
No, it was to be clear, to make it clear that it was an entity type. But yes, it's not needed.
Okay, all right.
So I
okay.
assume in this case, Eiffel Tower doesn't have a date associated with it. So it's doing it through all time.
That's the point. It's doing it. This is okay. So both entities in geo within Q, in principle, both entities are space-time blobs. So now for each entity, and maybe I'm coming to your geovariant idea, each entity, so in other words, natively, each entity is a blob in space-time. But what you're effectively proposing is, but you could have a geovariant that defines a projection into space or into time.
Yes,
Well,
something like that.
Yeah, or defines a different region in space-time.
It's an
Okay.
instruction to the geofunctions about how they should be interpreted.
I understand that, but a way to think about it is we're taking the blob in space-time and we're simply looking at the silhouette of that blob, in a sense, not quite the silhouette, but like the maximum extension thing is, I don't know quite what that is. It's not a silhouette. A silhouette would be the combination of all,
Right,
all maximum extents and so on.
But it'd be like you take the maximum extent and you just project it out to, infinite future and infinite past. Like it's
Okay,
big.
right. But you see,
vision.
there's another question that you're not addressing here, which is was this point ever in the Roman Empire?
Well, what do you mean by point? Because Battle of Antioch is a point because it has a date, but Eiffel Tower is a line.
Okay, was this spatial point
As in,
ever
what does the spatial point mean? A line?
is the line in space is the world, is the thing
line in time, right?
Yes, a line in time.
Line in time. Yes,
world line or something. Was this spatial point ever in the Roman Empire? Right, so that means that is a silhouette question about the Roman Empire. That's not just about the maximum extent of the Roman Empire. That's about, any one of these tentacles reaching out into the Caspian Sea as it shouldn't.
In that case, it almost doesn't matter. I mean, as long as you don't, it doesn't matter whether you're looking at the Union Geo-Empire or the Geo-Empire projected to all time, or, as long as you're not looking at maximum extent, that will give you the same answer in that case.
Fine. But I mean, that's okay. That's ever in the Roman Empire, which is different from, was this spatial point in the maximum extent Roman Empire? And another question would be, does this space-time blob, were the Hanging Gardens of Babylon always in the Babylonian Empire, or did they exist after the Babylonian Empire had fallen?
Well, actually, the simpler case would be the Battle of Antioch case, which is this sort of spatio-temporal point, actual point in space-time in the Roman Empire.
Right, okay. Okay. So let's take a look at this then. And so now geo-identify, well, let's see, what are the various functions? What is geo-entities? What is that?
Geo-entities searches for every entity that is contained within a given reference. For instance, these are all the military conflicts in the Roman Republic.
In space-time.
In space-time, yes.
Space-time.
If we wanted, with this methodology, to do all the entities that spatially were included inside the Roman Republic, we could use the GeoVariant GeoGroup.
A horrible name, but I understand the concept. Okay, so what you're trying to define here, I'm beginning to understand this, is you want a GeoVariant that means basically the spatial region, really what you want. Oh my gosh, so wait a minute, we've got the spatial region the union spatial region covered by the entity. The spatial region unioned over time. Spatial region unioned over time. Is that one? That's one of the
every point that was ever in the Roman Empire.
Yeah. Every point ever in Empire X. Okay. The next thing we want is this question of a timed. So, okay. So entities can intrinsically have positions and times. They can have positions, times, positions plus times. Okay, so for example, the Eiffel Tower could have, I mean, it's an interesting point of things that still exist and have an infinite future potentially. It has a position and it could have a time, but it doesn't have a time right now. Correct? mean, we could tag. Is Alan here? Yes, Alan is here. We
Yeah.
could like tag buildings with, they started at this time and they go into the future.
Well, we have construction start and completion dates and destruction dates in cases where we know things have been destroyed in a lot of cases.
Right. But I mean,
So
what that
we have properties we could use to define the likely lifespan of a thing.
so
I
in
mean,
that
presumably you'd want to have, some sort of standardized start date. You classify, if it's a building property, this is the, if it's a building, this is the property you use to denote its start date, and this is the property used to denote its end date, and that would define it. Sort of, yeah.
Right, but
Although even just to throw one wrinkle into that gets potentially a little bit complicated too, because you have a lot of buildings that, we have a construction start date and a construction end date, and the space between those points could be years or many years. And you might be interested in, other things in space-time close to the thing when they first started construction, but you might also be interested in only knowing about the finished building.
Yep. So that's essentially an entity variant.
Yeah.
Of whether the building was finished or not. Show this building only when finished. Now, in that old temporal logic thing that never got finished, Jose, which we should come back to, by the way.
Yep.
We had a notion of future infinity, right? Which we don't have.
We have a symbol now.
Oh, we
infinite
do?
future.
What's
Yeah, it was introduced for entities.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Infinite
We can
future,
have
infinite past.
So we have a date. We can have a date interval that says, somewhat optimistically, the United States was started at this date and extends into the infinite future.
Now you're talking crazy.
Whatever. Okay. So, but then so right now, the only entities that are space-time tagged are historical countries. Is that a true statement? No. We've also got like battles and things are space-time tagged, although those are points rather than extended regions.
Right,
Yes.
military conflicts.
Well, although there are battles like in World War II and things, there are quote unquote battles that lasted months.
And how do we tag those? We tag them with date intervals?
Yes. Battles are
World War II itself obviously has a multi-year extent. So,
but we don't have a polygon for that, right? So
yes.
it's not well defined that as a polygon.
But
We have
there
the
are
point.
battles that last for a certain amount of time, and in that case, they are defined by a start date and an end date.
fine. But I mean, in fact, we could perfectly well have the fact that we don't have a polygon for World War II is not necessary. I mean, it's a little weird because we think of World War II as being a set of point hotspots of battles, as opposed to a thing that involved an extended area, I think. But we could think of it. And I think I don't know, I mean, yeah, that's a weird thing, isn't it? Because
there's weird stuff you get.
Could imagine wanting to ask questions about World War II that are only about things that are contemporaneous with it in time and not in space.
I understand, but I mean, if you ask the question, take look. Here's a question we might ask. Was Crete in World War II? Let's say.
Well, that makes it sound like you're asking if it was an actor in World War II. But
yes, I think that might mix the.
Yeah.
Okay, fine, but I mean, I'm saying,
like
was
this city
Fiji
was involved
in World War II? And you can ask, yes, was Fiji as a country involved, and was the territory of Fiji a place where things happened in World War II?
I think that is a hopeless historical question where it's going to be like it's just like one of those things of, I mean, that's an example that demonstrates why I don't think you can do this, because whether or not Fiji was involved will be the sort of thing where historians would debate it, and they'll be, quoting, well, the king of Fiji said on this date that, you know, he thought X
Yeah.
or Y, and so that signaled involvement or something. And it's like, you know, good luck. But I mean, that was the example I was going to bring up with World War II. Is like, oh, well, do you color, like, you know, the entire Pacific as in the war or not? Like, it's
I
just,
understand.
you know,
Right.
like
So
in
you're
principle,
saying,
there could have been a battle in Antarctica. It didn't happen, but there might have been. So maybe Antarctica was in the war.
right. And so one thing that we could say here is a country, at least in fairly modern times, has some legal declaration of its borders. You know, I think, you know, in a war, people say we're going to war, but they don't say, oh, you know, in this region of the Pacific is now part of the theater of war. At least I don't think so. I don't think there's any legal sense in which that's the case.
At least historically, that was definitely not the case. I don't think there's any standard for that. I mean, certainly the Romans did not do that.
Right. But they did have, okay, so historical countries have some sense in which they had legally defined borders.
That is often not the case.
Okay, but I mean, in
Like,
concept,
usually not the case, but yeah.
I don't know when people started having treaties about those things. Probably by the 1600s or something. Maybe earlier than that. I don't know.
There are
But-
some Babylonian ones, of course, but yes.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, but so now let's come back here to what. Okay, let's look at now that I have a little bit of a better understanding of what the heck you're talking about. You are proposing 3 geovariants. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And except you had later at the bottom, you had what's essentially a date variant or something, or something which is taking a historical country. Like if I want to take, okay, let's say this.
It's basically a proposal to treat the temporal part, the date part, in a separate way.
Why doesn't that work? Why doesn't, I mean, to me, I don't understand why should this work? Date interval of French Second Republic.
So this is an idea that we have explored recently, and it is imitating the fact that the geo entities, which are those entities responding at your position to the property position, could and can be used anywhere in geo functions. The same thing could happen for the dated entities in date functions.
Yes, I think so.
It would be a matter of agreeing that if they have a property called date, the date functions will just extract that date.
And maybe more generally, they could have start date and end date things. But it, as brought up earlier, there are questions about, you know, start of construction or end of construction or whatever.
Right, but those are going to be variants which are like geovariant, except that those are some kind of date variant.
Right. So
There's some
geoposition
kind of-
asks for six different properties to the entities. And in order, it says, oh, if you return something to coordinates, I use this. If you didn't return anything from properties, for position.
I see.
So
Okay,
here
so we can do
something
the same thing with these.
Exactly.
So, and in particular, if we ask for date object of this, I don't know what we exactly return. We return a start time or something, presumably.
Right. And
Okay.
date interval would return an interval if it has a start and end.
Yep. And various variants of that.
Mhm.
You know, right now we have dated as a qualifier, and clearly dated, we could take, presumably, well, dated would override, you know, what the heck would happen if I said the Battle of Antioch, but I wrapped dated around it? Would that mean the remaining properties of the Battle of Antioch, like its geolocation, but now projected to a different date? Or would it be an error, or what would it mean?
I think it's a restriction.
I see. So it might miss, in which case there would be nothing there.
Well, but hold on. But if there are properties of the Battle of Antioch that don't have a date qualifier, then does that mean that those properties sort of extend infinitely in time? So, like, you know, if you had a building,
Yeah, and what color was
Yeah.
it? It was green. But of course, it might have turned from green to red on a certain date. Okay, let's come back over here and try to understand this. So first thing is the time series. Now, what is that time series? Is that a time series with polygons inside it, or what?
Yes.
So if I take that time series and I say, for example,
Normal.
well, how about geo area?
Yes.
Ugh, that's not good. So I would have expected, go ahead.
Geographics understands this, but not the rest of the geofunctions.
Wait, what does geographics do with the time series?
What they did on the
Values.
left.
Values. It's doing the same as with associations.
What the
It
heck
takes
is
the values.
What is that doing? Why is that errored out here? Missing is not a graphics primitive or directive. That's not encouraging. Okay, so there's a problem there.
Okay,
No, the problem is that for the time series, we are tagging, because we don't have time series that can have a limit, we are adding an extra element for the last date with missing value. Because if not, the time series assumes that it goes infinitely to the future. So if you get values of this, you will get a missing as last value.
Is there not a reason, I'm thinking about this, is there not a reason to have the last polygon repeat at the end date? It's better to have this missing?
What do you mean by last polygon? So how can we differentiate if they don't go to the... So the problem is that time series doesn't have any option to actually say, okay, the time series spans between this date and this date.
Right.
But what happens if you're outside of those dates? By the way, I really hate the fact that these dates are not granular correctly. We really should just go and fix that. Every country border we have is just to the year. Let's just make it granular to the year. Can we do that, please?
The problem is that they are not granular to the year, all of them. So modern countries have granularity to up to day, to a day.
Well, fine, but you guys are capable of going in and figuring out the granularity and putting it in. Mm-hmm. Please do it. Mm-hmm. It's just going to look silly otherwise, right?
Yes, we have discussed this with the time series team.
Right, but I mean, but it's not time series. It's a question of the data for these countries.
But time series cannot have different granularities between the start and ending point.
Yeah, but that's a limitation in time series. So that's something for the time series developers to fix.
Okay, but you should have this. What does time series do? Does it conform them, or what does it do if you feed it something with different granularities of dates?
I think it's just projecting everything to absolute times at the moment.
Fine, but that's okay. But at least we won't get silly stuff here with...
Well, I think it'll still display in the time series box as January 1st, because it'll be projecting it to the absolute time. But it seems like it's useful anyway for the dates to have the right granularities elsewhere.
Yep.
Our node, who seems unable to actually speak in the audio channel, is commenting that it would be nice to be able to make videos from these things.
We talk a lot about space-time, and videos are a great way to to visualize.
Right. So the question is, can animation video, what is the workflow to go from these things to an animation video, given that we now have animation?
Time series. Time series of a bunch of polygons, right? I think they're full polygons for the Roman Empire here.
We do have a marketing example of that precisely.
Yeah.
If there's an argument that we should introduce a time series video.
Mm-hmm. The only thing is you have to make sure it's a little unclear, because I would expect that you'd give it a time series that spans 10 seconds and then it gives you a 10-second video.
Indeed, right.
But,
Roman Empire would be a very
long video.
Okay, but maybe it has a second argument, which is it's spanning time or something.
Yeah.
This is the thing.
I put a link in the chat to a video, and I'm not sure if you want to take a peek.
Did you just make it?
Yeah, with slideshow video and with the the dated Roman Empire thingies.
Okay, so this is made with using slideshow.
Slideshow video and
Right. And just but this is equal time for every polygon, not
it's 5 years each, yeah, per frame. And it's four frames per second. So 20 years per second, I think. No, that's not right.
no, but I understand, but what you did was you sampled the polygons of the Roman Empire every 5 years or whatever, and then you showed the results as a slideshow video.
Exactly.
Well, that's a good thing to do.
I think I've actually done the same maybe with animation video, where you just, you make the T range from, 1 to 200, and then you just take that time series and say of braces T.
Right. Okay, but so let's come back here. That's got to be easy to do, basically. But now what you're saying here, gosh. Okay, this time series and the termination of the time series, that's screwy, and we need to deal with it. And we can't have a missing hanging out there. So I don't quite understand your issue. Your issue before Arnaud was talking about it was a time series which ends in a 3 at this time. Doesn't it just end? Then that's the end of the time series. It has nothing more to say. It's not like it holds the 3 forevermore, does it?
The point is, the last polygon you have for the Roman Empire might be in 370, or but then you have to, but then your end date for the Roman Empire is, I don't know, 376 or something, or whatever, and so you have to you want it so that when you ask for what's the polygon for the Roman Empire in 372, so that it returns that 371, it doesn't say, oh, you're outside the time series.
I understand. So I don't quite understand how time series versus event series. I don't understand, and we don't have anybody from that group, and maybe we can have another one of these meetings that includes people from the time series group, because they must have a way of defining. I mean, it's very much like list step plot or something. Of, you've got a value. Does it extend forwards, backwards, middle, whatever it is, right? So time series should have a way of saying this value is being stated at this time, but extends over this interval. Does it not have any such mechanism? I mean, so what I would be thinking is, what really should be happening is that polygon from 372 that really extends to 376 should really have a date interval associated with it, that every polygon here should have a date interval associated with it.
Yeah, I think time series has these properties where you can get the start date, the end date, and you can get the values. It's, all of that stuff is sort of done with properties in time series.
But also, I think it's probably my guess is that it's an important property of time series, that it kind of assumes that the times are like instants, or like that the time, like, I think in the end, the data probably has to get into a form like that, although maybe there should be some ways of inputting data,
Look, what this is something between event series and time series. Time series is defining a function as a function of time that happens to be where it is an interpolation of certain values sampled at certain specific times. Event series is, it only happens, the earthquake only happens at these moments and nothing's happening in between. And what we're defining here is a third case, which is basically a union of intervals, I think.
I think the proper thing to have done here is to have an empty polygon at the end. So because we are setting each interval by its beginning, the final should be just an empty polygon, not a missing.
Okay.
And then geographics would know what to do with an empty polygon.
But what would happen between the date of the last polygon that was stated and the actual end of the empire?
It's the last polygon, the last non-empty polygon.
Right, because it's already using some interpolation thing where you basically just say, use whatever the most recent previous polygon was. But actually, sorry, a problem maybe with the empty polygon would be if you had that time series and you want to do something like show me the area as a function of time, and you map geo area over it, you're going to have these weird, it collapses to 0 at the end.
It's a hack. We need a better solution. I mean, it really should just have the data extends to the end of the empire, and then we say no more. And it shouldn't just go to 0, for example, at the end of the empire.
Well, that was my question: is why not have the last thing? You have the last real polygon at 470, and you say the empire ends at 476. Why don't you just have that last 470 polygon reappear at 476? Right. That way, the mapping geo area would work. You can imagine that. Well, this was its polygon 5 minutes before it collapsed, and so this is a reasonable polygon to give for 476.
I mean, clearly that would be, the barbarians were invading, and it wasn't really correct. But the question is whether we think that's the least of the evils, to show it really was at its full extent, and then the barbarians made it all collapse.
I mean, the point is, we're already saying in any of these cases, we're already saying if you ask in 475.9, we're still saying, oh, it looked like this, where we're giving the 470 polygon. So it seems reasonable to just still show that maybe slightly wrong polygon for the last date too.
It's a bit of a hack, but yes, I agree. It's probably the least of the evils. Bob on our live stream is asking, can we specify whether we're defining the Western or Byzantine empires as the continuation of the Roman Empire? I believe we have all of that information, right? Because we're defining that. How would we see that? How would we see that? We would see, if I say Roman Empire, probably it has a ... that asks whether it is the Western Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, etc. So that's the first place we get to see it. But is there a way in which this is this whole question of when is a country a country? We can ask the question, what things have there ever been that overlapped Constantinople or whatever, that overlap the position of Istanbul, whatever it is, which is a little different again. This is again the space-time versus space question. Okay, so let's go back over here. We've got this time series, which I don't think should be a geovariant. I think that should just be a value. What the heck should this be? This really wants to be the space-time geo-object. That's what this really is. It's not a time series. Time series is yet something different.
This could be data at all, for example.
Yeah, but this could also be a geo-time series.
So what would a geo-time series do? So far it seems like we've been using time series as the generic way of projecting any object in time. So what would a geo-time series do that is different from what a time series of geo-polygons or geo-positions would do?
Well, for example, it will be eaten by geo-functions in a reasonable way, in a way that I don't think time series can be eaten by geo-functions.
Why not?
Well, maybe it should be.
It's being proposed here that it will. My only point would just be that usually when we introduce a new construct like this, it's because, there's some subtle difference between what a time series fundamentally represents and what a geo-time series has to represent. But I'm not sure
there ultimately will be, because in a sense, there's ribbing of the particular polygons we have, and then there's some complicated interpolation between those polygons.
But isn't that already what time series does? You have limited things, and maybe there's interpolation between them.
Okay, but there's so fine. But so is there a possibility then that geo within, for example, could geo within Q, then geo within Q would have to take a time series?
That's what's proposed in the notebook.
Is it?
Yes, wasn't it? Oh no, sorry. Maybe it was just taking a geo variant.
Yeah, it's different. That it actually could take a time series.
Yeah.
That has to work. As opposed to just the symbolic geo variant, it would have to be geo within Q. And then what it would be, very bizarrely, was you could do geo within Q of a time series, one time series, and then another time series. See what I'm saying? And that would then have the space-time, would be asking a space-time question. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Now, can we make that work?
Yes. Currently, it now works in the internal functions. It is not yet exposed, but it works with.
Okay, but let's see whether. Okay, so then in that case, what we're basically saying is a space-time country is represented by a time series. That's what we're saying. I don't know whether we'll get away with that, but that's what we're saying right now. And okay, and that geo within Q, if it is given a time series, will by default treat that. Okay, so by default, it will treat this thing as a space-time blob, unless it is given a geovariant of, for example, well, if it's given a dated of this, clearly what should happen is dated of a time series has got to project out the thing for that particular date, if that makes sense, right? That would be the consistent thing to do there. Makes sense, guys, right?
Yep.
And then there could be a geovariant that says, that takes the time series effectively. I mean, it can also take a symbolic object, but it takes the time series and it says something like maximum extent.
Actually,
so far, geovariant only takes entities. It's a modifier of entities.
I know that, but I'm saying I don't think that's going to work. I don't think that's enough.
Well, I think if we have the time series, we have essentially geometry. So we should use geometric functions to perform the operation we want.
Well, but how do you get maximum extent out of the time series?
Well, we would need a function to compute that, but geovariant sounds strange. Apply geovariant to a polygon even.
Well, I'm not necessarily disagreeing.
I mean, with this, it would turn into a general purpose. I mean, we have like image measurements, which gives you all sorts of little properties. I mean, this would basically turn geovariant into something like image measurements for time series, or for not even for time series, for geo things, which I agree seems a little strange.
Okay, but so what other cases do we need something that projects from this time series? You get out the time series, or you could replace that time series by an entity that implicitly disgorges the time series.
I think the time series team is developing a time series select. So this could be something like select the element of largest area or something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Or maybe be some time series max. I assume max already works on time series, but it would be like a maximal buy on the time series or something.
Right, but the problem is that what we're wanting is something where directly within geo within Q, you are asking for this maximum extent. See, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make sure that it's a level playing field between you disgorged out the time series and then wanted to look at this variant on it versus you had that coming straight from the entity.
Right. So one other, I think that makes sense, by the way. One other question in terms of, having the geovariants behave the same as the disgorged time series is, can time series deal with like infinite future? Because if you had something like, Eiffel Tower where it has, end date, presumably the time series version of that would need an infinite future or something.
We need to ask the time series team. And the next time we do one of these meetings, we need time series people here. Let's see whether there's anything else we can cover. Oh, Francisco has the stacked time. Let me just pull this in. What the heck? That's a pretty non-trivial piece of code. But this is going to give us the space-time Roman Empire.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Or at least the space-time Roman Republic. It's not exactly a trivial piece of code. Wow. That's cool.
That's pretty cool.
And those are our actual polygons. Those are not, or are those
Yes.
your samplings? Those are the polygons.
No. Those are all the polygons we have for the Roman Republic. Yes.
Right. So that it's actually ignoring the time.
It's ignoring the time, but
Yeah.
it's sorting them in the right order.
Mhm.
So we could make this.
Okay,
the
so
time
by
actually-
putting more ribbing, what we could do is
Yeah.
put those at their times. I think it would be actually nice to see this just for the hell of it, because I think this is the, I mean, it's not completely obvious we shouldn't have the ability to generate these. They're kind of interesting.
Yeah, so the space between each one right now is fixed, but it could be the time.
Exactly.
spans.
But then you could
Yes,
put
yes.
ribbing on the outside to join these up so that this thing is a blob in space-time.
Right.
That's a kind of complicated geo operation, I think, but yeah.
Right. But I mean, so what we're asking is, in general, gosh, this is complicated. I mean, my question would be, if we were able to produce these space-time regions, in principle, would our region functionality be able to resolve all questions about, was this within this one? Did this have a tentacle hanging out of this one? Did they overlap? All those kinds of things. Are those questions actually answerable? Given that we have these regions, is it answerable that way?
So
This is what
somehow,
you-
with all the work done by Cesar Lolli, we could try to answer all the questions. The problem is the syntax. So,
No. But let me say my thing again. Okay. Let's assume we converted this to a 4-dimensional region. Okay. Do you know if our existing region functionality would answer all the questions we want to answer? Do you understand what I'm asking?
My guess is theoretically yes, like the region within, region member, region within, stuff like that would, region disjoint queue. My
Does it
guess
work
is
with
that
4D regions?
I think a lot of those do. I don't think I've ever tried it, but a lot of the more basic operations like that do. Certainly things like region intersection and so on, I don't.
Right. Okay, but I mean, my point is that will be a ground truth that we can start from. We understand we don't know how to specify all of this, but let's say we could return. Let's say we had a property of Roman Republic, which was the 4D space-time region.
and it doesn't need to be 4D because actually coordinates are 2 elements. Right?
Oh, yeah, you're right. You're right. I was confused. So definitely our region functionality will be able to do this. So, I mean, the ground truth.
Giving up a projection, of course, right?
What's that? Given a projection. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit funky. But I mean, in principle, every question that we could ask here, every different within, intersecting, blah, 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 we could answer with our region functionality from that. And I think that's a useful thing to understand, that we could have because that takes a certain amount of pressure off the more obscure geometric questions. If we provide people this escape valve where you can just use generic region functionality for it.
Yeah, although the projection problem does seem pretty serious.
Well, I think they should go with vertical sides. So we don't try to interpolate. Interpolating here is basically hopeless because we would have to define a mapping of points of the boundary to the points of the boundary in the next step. And there might be topological changes. It's very difficult.
Right.
But if we declare that there are only vertical sides, so things are flat.
Yes.
It can be done.
Right.
Okay.
They should be flat within the span of each polygon, of course. Yes. And that's
Exactly.
how we are considering them in all this functionality with time. Yep.
Yep.
So they are discrete changes between each polygon. Yep.
Okay. So, okay, we're running out of time here for today. We need to continue this. can we try to continue this fairly soon before we've all forgotten how this works? Are there decisions that we need to make so that you guys can move forward on some things? I mean, we're not going to get the full solution here. This is going to require more thought. I think that, to me, obviously, these things should be available as properties of the historical country entities. This kind of approach where we are, able to sort of insert them as geovariants seems non-trivial to me.
I think one of the decisions we need to make if you want to pursue the having the separate temporal entities kind of functions or not. The ones at the end.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think we've got this notion. Look, that's a different thing that we want to ask. Look, that particular question. I see. So that's the analog of geoentities.
Right.
That's asking for this
only time axis. Yeah, only the time axis. Yep.
Right, but so we could do this for buildings as well. We could say
exactly, yes. I believe there's even an example below about inventions, for example.
Right. This is not exposed yet. This. But,
well, I like this concept. I mean, I don't know, but Alan has something to say about this concept because this is.
Oh, I think this is worth pursuing. I mean, I also kind of have questions. I don't know if you guys have thought about what the syntax would be or how we would do lookups on things, like kind of reverse lookups.
Right, because there is some intersection with the reverse lookups of entities. For example, at least for these temporal entities or dated entities, because you can have a reverse lookup starting after this date, before this other date. But for example, for nearest, there is no way to do that with the current entity framework. So you cannot search which are the closest to this date, right? So
is there really a place called Galacia as opposed to Galicia? Sorry, that's irrelevant. But anyway, never mind. Sorry, but please continue.
Right. So one question was if we want to follow this path also of adding time-only functions, right?
Now, why are some of these dynasties with a lowercase d and others with a capital D? Complaint. And Republic of Roads, why is the of capitalized? Hey, there's some
cleanup needed.
What's that? Yes. Yeah. Summary. Okay. And I don't even understand whether this is like intersecting with -100 or whether this is. Yeah, I mean, this clearly seems worthwhile, but I mean, then I don't understand what happens if you want. Do these things fit in the space-time box of this and this? In other words, was it between 19? Okay, I want sub-Saharan African countries that existed between 1950 and 1970. So then I need a box in space and time.
Yes, that kind of thing could be done with the support we did on geoentities, using dated geographic region and times.
I understand, but to me that seems. I mean, okay, so we've got three cases then. We've got geoentities, we've got sort of time-bounded geoentities using dated, and then we've got dated-bounded entities irrespective of geo, right? And to me, it's a little bit inelegant that the geoentities have this sort of tentacle using dated to restrict them in time, and then we've got a whole different thing restricting in time.
Right. That's why we discussed a possible way of mixing these sort of functions with the geo functions to make to make everything.
I understand that, but you haven't given the third case of space-time restricted.
No, the space-time, right. We haven't defined that as a different set of functions. Right now we are doing that with the current geo functions.
Right. I mean, I do think, I mean, I hate to sound sort of, I don't know. I mean, Jose, in the end, as we do all this astro stuff, we're going to end up having to deal with space-time somehow. And I mean, we're going to, I think, dancing around, pretending we're not dealing with it. In the end, we're going to have to deal with it. Just as we've dealt with, intervals in time, regions in space.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to end up with a collection of functions for space-time, I think.
But I think maybe the issue here is that, so we already have a generic time thing, which is time series. We're taking anything and projecting into time. And if we had a specific space-time functionality, then, well, then the question is it Euclidean space? Is it geo pseudo-spherical space? Is it astrospherical space?
Yeah.
It's going to just evolve into this whole same set of functions.
Possibly you're right. But possibly what we need is a wrapper that says, I mean, look, the fact is, putting geo polygons into a time series is not necessarily a trivial act, because time series wasn't really built for that originally. I mean, I'm even horrified by thinking about, if you think about time series in the astro case, Jose, it's going to get really horrifying, because let's say you put into time series a position on a moon of Jupiter or something. How the heck does that work? I mean, the thing is moving around. It's,
Right. So my idea there is that the astro functions will be able to handle those things by themselves, but users will always be able to construct data, put it in a time series, and then do whatever they want to do additionally, because time series will have new functions. And Roger is working on a new concept of time series, which will be extended and more powerful. So the possibility will always be there to convert into time series, but it's not going to be the basis of how.
But I mean, so just to give me a sense of this. I mean, so in principle, we could ask the question. I mean, although this is a crazy question, in galactic coordinates, where did the Roman Empire trace out in galactic coordinates? The Earth is going around the sun is going around the center of the galaxy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This traced out a particular position.
Yes. So this goes into Astro now, but in Astro, we also have points, events, and world lines. And for example, when we do, as we were doing a couple of days ago, observe Mars from this point is an event, Mars is a world line. So we are computing internally the intersection of the world line with the light rays emitted towards the past from this position. Right?
Yes.
So the computation is there. It's just that we are not exposing it yet because we don't have a concept of world line. And what I will call in the future, or I would call in the future, astro orbit. That
okay,
will come
but
later.
the point is, the Eiffel Tower is a world line too.
Yep.
And that's what we're realizing, is that we have essentially the same type of issue, although it's not as elaborate a world line as some of these ones for moving astronomical bodies, because we're assuming the coordinate system is fixed for the Eiffel Tower. I mean, here's an example. For example, a plane that's flying that makes a geo trajectory, that's absolutely a world line.
Exactly. That's another concept that we started, but we haven't completed because of this type of problem.
Which type of problem?
How to combine space and time. So this project we are reviewing today is kind of on the forefront of this. So it's
right. But the point that I'm making is, I think we got to bite the bullets and just decide we're going to go to space-time, because I think any of these things where we're hacking around it,
Mhm.
with, dated geo entities and things like that, eventually it's all going to crumble. And we'll be better off just, starting off from a ground truth that is a genuine space-time presentation, and then maybe slicing off pieces that are simpler. Now, I think Christopher's point about what the heck do we do about the spatial coordinate systems? I mean, what have you done in the Astro case for that? You must have addressed that in the Astro case.
Yes. So all these, okay. So how this works is that we have a word line, which defines like the origin of a frame, and then we have a notion of three axes around that word line, which define the orientation spatially. And with that, that's enough. That's why all the time we have to say in Astro, I'm looking from Mars, from the center of Mars, and I'm using equatorial coordinates.
Okay.
The center of
But
Mars defines the world line, and the equatorial coordinates the orientation.
Okay, but so do you think the same thing will work here? So in other words, in what Francisco drew here, where he's just got these flat pieces, you believe that same extrusion by world line, looking from whatever in equatorial coordinates or whatever, that same thing can be executed here?
Yes, actually here it's easier because we always use the same coordinates, which are horizon based, right? They're north, east, up.
Okay. So you don't think there's a problem in extruding to space-time of geo data?
No, there is no problem. And effectively, this is what they are doing in the computation. It's just that I don't think we want to use that terminology to do.
Oh, yeah, I understand
things.
that. I understand that. But my prediction is that for us to understand it and not get confused, we're going to be best off starting from the, albeit rather fancy sounding, space-time formulation of the whole thing. And that then we can, after we understand that, and after we understand that what we're really asking is, I don't completely know. Okay. My claim is there are going to be cases where you really want the whole space-time question answered, of intersection between these space-time regions. There are also going to be most cases where you couldn't care less about that, and where you are looking at, and that's possibly what, Cesar's geovariants here are really about, that there are really three projections that you actually care about most of the time, and we'll just give those names, and that will all be fine. But there'll be a ground truth underneath that is based on the full space-time picture. That's my feeling about how the design should work. And
I think I agree with that.
Right, and that way we know what these projections, we can define this is a projection in this way with respect to the underlying space-time object.
Right. So we have to emphasize that in this context, the speed of a light would be infinite.
What's that? The speed of light is irrelevant. We're not worrying about the speed of light.
Yeah.
Except deeply implicitly through the fact that time and anyway, never mind. Right. I mean, we're using a static view of space-time. There are no it's merely I don't even know. I think the speed of light has gone to infinity probably for our purposes here.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I need to go to a different meeting here, which I think is also being live streamed, another design review. Can we try and bring this back, please, within the next week? And maybe you guys can have a think about what the kind of space-time ground truth might look like. Sound reasonable?
Okay.
This is very nice functionality, not a moment too soon, after we see our notes from 2018 and so on. And yeah, good stuff. All right, see you guys soon.